Welcome, everyone. This afternoon, we're going to do as Joel has suggested and examine the property and casualty insurance industry's response to arguably the biggest and certainly the most expensive event ever to hit the Canada's property and casualty insurance market. The numbers speak for themselves. You've read them, I'm certain. $3.77 billion at last count in insured losses, approximately 1,600 structures that were destroyed, and 90,000 or so people evacuated for a month. It is clear, even to a casual observer, that the industry had and has an enormous job to do in responding to those tens of thousands of evacuees, and as it continues what is an unprecedented rebuilding effort to assist people in getting their lives back to some semblance of normal. The big question, and the focus of today's session, is, did we get it right? Did we get it right in Fort McMurray? Many think that we did pretty well. As Joel said, there was coverage. At IBC, we've heard and we continue to hear praise for the way in which the P&C insurance industry responded. But this session isn't about self-congratulations. The intent of this is to get to the heart of what worked and what didn't. Because in a customer-oriented industry, we cannot answer, did we get it right, without engaging those directly affected about their experience. And residents' reaction ranged from complete satisfaction to profound disappointment and, in some instances, even rage. So before we dive into attempting to answer that question with our panelists, who I'll introduce here in a moment, I want to tell you about what I saw in Fort McMurray during my last visit there just a few weeks ago. You would be shocked, absolutely shocked, to see all that's going on in that town. I was stunned at the magnitude of reconstruction activity underway. A sea of contractors, carpenters, electricians, delivery trucks, and more. Half-tons, bumper to bumper, block after block, all jostling to get as much work done as possible before the winter arrives and the first full rebuilding season closes. So far, about 5% of the homes destroyed are ready for their owners to move back in. And while everyone would like that number to be much higher, the reality is there are some unique challenges and complexities in rebuilding thousands of homes all at once in a northern Canadian community. However, the numbers behind that 5% are much more encouraging. Foundations for almost 40% of destroyed homes have passed inspection. This critical step allows other trades to move in and begin framing and insulation so interior finishing can continue over the cold winter months. Of course, this matters most to those people who are still out of their home and wanting to get back. I'm sure you can all sense that when you talk to residents still struggling to get home, to borrow a phrase, you can feel their pain. Their frustrations are real, as you can see on their faces and in their words. Their situations are exceptionally diverse. In some instances, it's impossible to close a claim because people are emotionally just not capable of making the decisions that would ultimately allow them to close the claim and to move on with their lives. Last fall, once the initial situation had calmed down, IBC conducted some focus groups. This is a collection of the people who were in those focus groups who chose to share their comments publicly, knowing that it would be heard by the insurance industry in this forum today. And we heard, as you can see, a mixed response. Happily, from the focus groups, most people expressed a high level of satisfaction with their insurer. Conversely, a high level of dissatisfaction was expressed specifically with independent adjusters and the adjustment process more generally. The quality of compassion shown by insurers and their representatives came through as the single most important driver in their overall level of satisfaction with their claims process. Unfortunately, some people spoke of feeling re-victimized by the claims process. Frustrations grew of many irritants. Perhaps the most prevalent was confusion about insurance policies and coverages, and you heard that a number of times in the video comments. As we see time and time again as an industry, many policy holders simply don't understand their coverage. Those who were knowledgeable about their insurance routinely came away with much more positive experiences, and some actually characterize them as a positive experience. So that sets the table for our panel to weigh in on whether we got it right or not in Fort McMurray. Each of our panelists was uniquely involved in the disaster response, some right through until today. And we have with us today, I'll start on my left, Aaron O'Neill. Aaron is the operations manager for the Recovery Task Force, the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo, which in part is Fort McMurray. And Aaron was part of the core team on the ground in the very early days of the wildfire and has continued in a municipal leadership role through recovery and now rebuilding. Next to Aaron is Shane Schreiber, the Assistant Deputy Minister and Managing Director of Alberta Emergency Management Agency, who was the province of Alberta's senior non-political leader in charge of managing the response under the provincial state of emergency. Next to Shane is Mike Van Ellsberg, the Deputy Senior Vice President of Claims in Western Canada for Intact, who provided leadership in managing myriad claims-related issues and, like all of us up here on the stage, spent a great deal of time in Fort McMurray over the last 17 months. And finally, at the end is Reid Feist of Global National, who was also on the ground, capture and reporting many of the stories from the early days onward for the millions of Canadians who were riveted by this tragedy. Welcome to you all, and thanks very much for being here. So, let's get started. The theme of this session is, did we get it right? So let's start there. Insurance industry's response in Fort McMurray. What went right? What went wrong for our customers, our stakeholders, and our industry? Aaron, do you want to start us off?
So what went well from my perspective of being on the ground was when the adjusters or the insurance company was on the ground, they gained that situational awareness of Fort McMurray. So for anybody that hasn't been to Fort McMurray, it's 431 kilometers from Edmonton. It is pretty much the end of the road there. It doesn't have the same services everywhere else. We don't have a Home Depot, we don't have a Costco, all those types of things. And we have one furniture store. So everybody trying to get new fridges, all those types of things. So I think the adjusters or the insurance companies that were on the ground and were able to talk to the residents really helped and is still helping today, because you can really understand what people are going through when it's different than any normal city. I also think the other really great thing that went well was IBC being in the Emergency Operations Center. We gained a lot of efficiencies through our white goods program of picking up our fridges and making that easy, that it was one process for everyone as opposed to regardless of who you were insured with. So that went really, really well. From what I would say could use some help, or maybe what went wrong, is one of the biggest things for us is 3 of our hardest hit areas were restricted access. So everyone else came home on June 1st. There was 3 communities that we weren't allowed to let back in. They were allowed a timed re-entry every day due to restrictions from the Chief Medical Officer of Health. And there was a lot of misconceptions out there that those people were coming to us saying, we were telling everyone, go ahead, start your restoration project. If you have to replace, windows, doors, all those types of things. If you need to get your house cleaned, do that now. And then what we were hearing back from them is, my insurance company is telling me that the municipality is going to come in and rip down all those houses, and they're not spending any money about it. So I guess that whole miscommunication in those restricted areas was really hard, because those people were doubly hit. We initially told them they'd be able to come home, and then a few days before re-entry we said, no, you're actually not going to be able to come home. The last of those people were not allowed to come home till November the 4th. So that was a long period of time. If they hadn't started that restoration, really they lost that entire construction season to be able to do things. I think some of the other things I'm hearing about what went wrong is early on, the insurance industry threw money at it, which was great because there was a lot of claims settled. For somebody like me who my house was okay and I just needed to have my ducts cleaned and things like that. But a lot of people now have really nice bar fridges in their garages because they just got rid of those and it was very easy for them. And we're hearing now that a lot of people who had damage or lost their homes, it's harder for them and they're being questioned. I have a friend who they basically tore her house down to the studs, and she wanted to get a new mattress for her child, and they said, no, we'll just clean your mattress. Whereas everyone else, it felt like they were throwing money at it, and a lot of people are saying it would have been a lot easier if I would have lost my whole house, as opposed to go through that process when I only had when I had major damage, but not my whole loss. So I think contents insurance has been an interesting, some people say they shouldn't have to write down everything they own, and other people say, they were in their parents' kitchens trying to figure out what they had to replace that list. So that was what I'd say were the main concerns that we had.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. Reed.
I would say the one thing that we heard from a news perspective was the idea of the different insurance adjusters, whether it was independent or company. If we got emails from viewers about what the issue was, or if I heard that in telling the story, was that, I would talk to one guy for perhaps weeks or months, or perhaps it would change all the time. I think, obviously that continuity in a disaster is an issue. And like Aaron said, there was different stories being told. But from a media perspective, I went through the 2013 floods in southern Alberta, and we got a lot more emails, a lot more independent kind of stories about, well, my insurance company isn't doing this, or I'm having problems. We didn't get the same in Fort McMurray, and I think probably from the perspective the insurance company had learned a bit about kind of some other disasters, but there weren't widespread issues. The biggest thing that we heard, and then I heard from people as they went through the process, is just it was disconnected, and as Aaron said, location is a big issue in Fort McMurray. It was from a media perspective as well. It was difficult from that perspective.
And I think the comparison between the southern Alberta floods and the wildfires are two very different dynamics, because there was no coverage primarily
And
for most of the losses. Right?
Somewhat, I was expecting, okay, when do the emails come? When do well, this is my situation, and ultimately, from a news media perspective, those are things we want to investigate, right? And see if there is anything that, should be done. But in this case, as you say, as an insured loss, it was a different story.
Shane, from a provincial perspective, what went right and what didn't go so right?
So I think the good is that you're in the room. For those of you that don't know, Bill and IBC represented your industry in the Emergency Operations Center almost from day 2 of the event, as soon as we could get them up there and in there. And that was critically important. We included IBC industry reps on the nightly telephone town halls, where we used to try and communicate to all the residents what was going on. It's critically important because, one, they have an insurance expert both in the Emergency Operations Center and doing the communications. It is vital that we get as accurate information as possible out to the affected citizens, and that was a great help. It also allowed us to plan in a collaborative manner the steps going forward. So Aaron talked about the white goods disposal plan. That worked very well, largely because we had all the people that were required in the same room coming up with a plan. So it really helped us set the conditions for success, and I think that is a best practice in terms of inviting an insurance industry rep into an emergency operations center to begin planning the reentry and recovery as soon as possible, that we're going to continue to try and use within Alberta. And I've talked with all of my fellows across Canada, and they like the idea too. It allows you to move at the speed of trust in a very complex environment. The bad, and I think that this has already also been touched on, the uninsured and the underinsured, and also the number of people that were just not aware of what was covered, what they needed to do in order to work with their insurance companies to move their claim forward. And the psychological impact and psychological impasse that people can come upon when they're faced with, having lost all of their belongings, their home, standing around a neighborhood that's been burnt out. So that is the bad. And I think that, you've heard some of the comments about the importance of the human side of insurance. And, today we saw the futurist talk about how, we finished your claim in 3 seconds and you've been paid. I'm not so sure that that's going to allow everybody that's undergone one of these things to recover in an effective manner. That's not necessarily what they want from their insurance company. In a lot of cases, what they want is that human touch to help them through the process. And then the ugly. So I would say the ugly is what could have happened. The Conference Board of Canada has set the total economic losses of the Wood Buffalo Fire at about $7 billion. We only lost 10% of the housing stock. We did not lose a single oil sands production facility. We did not lose a piece of critical infrastructure. What could have happened is a loss in the tens of billions of dollars. And I think that maybe, you know, you're looking at some of that now as a result of the hurricane damage in places like Houston and down south. But what does that mean? I mean, that is ugly for your industry and really, frankly, for what we do in the public safety and emergency management realm in conjunction with insurance. So those are the good, the bad, and the ugly.
And I think it was a bit of a wake-up call, I think, for a lot of folks who write there and looking at the modeling for what that ugly scenario might have been and whether or not proper underwriting's taking place given the level of the risk. And I just want to touch, Shane, if I can, on that best practice because Shane and I have had a number of conversations over the years going back to 2013, and the sense of moving at the speed of trust is an important aspect in the response because it really was the experience between Alberta Emergency Management Agency and IBC on behalf of the industry in the 2013 floods. As ugly as some of that was, that really gave us the opportunity to essentially open the door. And Shane invited us in the early days of the wildfire response. I'm pleased to say that we've in fact since then formalized an understanding between Alberta Emergency Management Agency and Insurance Bureau of Canada that I think, as I characterized it once, we end up at the same spot dealing with another set of circumstances and we figure it out. Well, maybe we need to, between those incidences, take some time to talk about what we can rely on one another for and what the expectations are of the other at a time where you're responding so that you do move swiftly in responding to residents and to customers who are one and the same. So we are going to attempt to replicate that in every one of the provinces across the country because we do believe that it is in the best interest of Canadians, regardless of whether they're our customers or the province's residents. Mike, you give us an industry perspective on what went well and what didn't go so well.
Well, I don't think you have to look far around the world these days to realize how fortunate we are to be in Canada and to have a disaster services team that responds as well as they do when you look at the municipality and how well they did in responding with a focus on the well-being of people, the health of people, and then the gradual recovery and the whole staged recovery and how well that was done. I think the insurance industry then came to the table to support that as well, and so I think we've done a pretty good job. But you don't get better at doing these things by focusing on what you do well. You get better at doing these things by focusing on where the opportunities are. And when I look at that, there's lots of challenges with Fort McMurray that I think were new to us. The remoteness, it's quite far from anything. Getting our people in place, but the communication, setting expectations, you see that in some of the feedback in the video. The confusion, I think the industry needs to do a much better job of laying out a roadmap to recovery. I think, and Shane has brought this up before, we also need to focus on sort of the emotional recovery of our customers, that a lot of people can make it through these situations quite well, but there's also a segment of people who really struggle emotionally. And I don't know if we're putting enough time and effort into helping those people on the emotional resilience piece, because we still have customers today at Intact that don't know what they want to do. And they're very frustrated, they're very upset, but they simply can't make a decision on what they want to do regardless of the support that's there. While we have many, many other customers that are living in their new homes that are carrying on with life. So I think that's a piece that we probably need to learn from. And I don't know if it's an insurance industry, but I think when you look at resilience for a community, I think everyone sort of at the table here needs to put their mind to that.
How do you square that with the comments that Shane referred to and we heard earlier today about moving to a completely sort of autonomous, technologically driven industry?
I think if your bike got stolen, an app might be an okay way to go. But when your entire home and your family's life and everything has been disrupted, I think it's probably going to be a little bit more complicated than 1 or 2 taps on an app.
Well said. Let's talk a bit about large event, 3.7 billion, 90,000 or so people out for a month. Some negative responses, probably not a disproportionate number given the size of the event. When you've got an event of that large, is it really possible for everyone to be satisfied, or is it just an impossible challenge given the laws of large numbers? Where should we set the expectations for our industry when it comes to that? Shane, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, so I think it is impossible to satisfy everybody. First of all, they've been through a traumatic event, and so they're already going to need to be emotionally resilient, and they're going to find flaws in virtually everything because a bad thing has happened to them, and some of it is almost disbelief. And then where do you set the bar? Well, I think so I gotta say, I think you're doing the right thing now. To have the moral courage to get together in a room like this, to have a video like that produced and share both the attaboys and the negative, I think is great for your industry, and I think will probably help you grow as we all try and address what is an increasing vulnerability and likelihood of large-scale disasters in North America. So, my kudos to being open enough to endure the criticism and try and take something better away from it.
Reid, your media's often accused of looking for the negative stories. I suspect you, I know you reported on a few, but as is your role. Is it too high an expectation to assume that everyone's going to be satisfied?
No, I think it is, but I think in this case, there was the opportunity for the education. The evacuation, as you noted, was so long that people were waiting, people were upset and frustrated, but it was this chance to get your ducks in a row. So that's what kind of we saw from the media perspective. I think there could have been advantages to including us a little bit sooner in terms of messaging and what you can do when you go home, what should you check in your homes, etc. Because that was done to a certain extent. But I think in cases like this that you were able to control, I think you were able to help people out and set the expectations of what they were coming back to. And hopefully they had it more in their mind about, what they were going to have to deal with or, what sorts of things they had to do. There's so many other disasters where you can come back sooner and the big goal is to try to get back and see, okay, well, is this damaged? Is this flooded? And then I think that's when the hysteria or at least those negative stories can start coming out sooner because you're not able to get ahead of it all, right? And people are going back and they don't have the information because, frankly, the insurance companies and everyone else hasn't had a chance to set up something that would give them those answers. But it's definitely, I think in this case, the remoteness, again, we come back to it, was the thing that, was terrible in many cases, but it was also probably something that helped. Because you were able to kind of restrict, organize, and then you also had places like we went to the parking lot that had all the different insurance company vans, and that was a resource for people. And as recently I was in Houston after the hurricane hit, and there wasn't anything like that, and there was the free-for-all that anyone could really go back to whichever community they wanted, and they were throwing everything out on their front lawn. No one was getting information, and I think that's only setting up a situation down there for lots of negative stories and a long and hard road ahead.
Aaron, possible?
I don't think it's possible. I think had the scale may have been smaller, I think it may be possible, but I think there was so many unknowns. Yes, we put out, you could go online and see what your house looked like before and your house looked like after, and you could see that. So when you're, in Edmonton or Calgary or Newfoundland for that fact, you can go on and see what your house looks like if you should be coming home. But I really don't think we're ever going to satisfy anybody. And to touch on what Shane was saying earlier, you have some people that aren't prepared to deal with it. So they're emotionally shut down, they're not ready. And to this day, we have those people that, are now coming saying they've already got 3 notices from the bank that they're in foreclosure. They're not coming when they get the first notice, and people just aren't prepared to deal with it. So I don't think you're going to be able to satisfy everyone. Now, I think there was a lot of really good synergies in place with having IBC there and the government of Alberta and everyone at the table, that we could make decisions that made it easier for people. But I think given the size and the scale of the disaster, it was possible to satisfy everyone.
Mike, I've intentionally left you to the end, and without putting you too much on the hot seat, we've heard from 3 of the panelists that you're never going to satisfy everyone.
It's a good question. I don't know if you'll ever turn this into a positive experience. It's a horrific experience what these people go through, and when they flee their community under the conditions that they did, and their homes are destroyed. But I think we need to set that aside and focus on not making the recovery process part of the negative experience, because we'll never turn around the disaster. But I think how we support customers and the community and the municipality on rebuilding is where we need to focus our time. And I think it can be better. I don't know if you'll ever have 100% of people that are going to view that as a positive thing, but I think we definitely need to focus on how you can help the whole community and all of our customers recover, both financially, from a community standpoint, and also from that emotional standpoint.
So Shane, I know you've done some thinking. We've had some discussions in that area, that sort of whole of society approach. What can we as an industry do, and to Mike's point, what should we be thinking about for the next time as an industry to make that recovery process smoother? And given your role, what are the linkages that need to be stronger, that we need to be thinking about as an industry in our relationship with government at a time of response and recovery?
Yeah, so I guess I speak from experience. So you may not know it, but I think I run the disaster financial assistance program for the government of Alberta. So I think I'm actually the largest insurer in Alberta. Take a look at all the public sector infrastructure that I informally insure. And what we've discovered is it sounds funny, but it is a people-based business. And so I guess what I would say for the next time, for the people that are going to that generate that client satisfaction, they probably need better tools and training in advance before they have to go face what is, in a lot of cases, emotionally traumatized clients who aren't thinking about, the specifics of their policy and may not be wholly rational in response to what is a life-changing event for them. And so I think that's probably one area where you can look at. And then I think it's critically important that insurance